My name is Susan McGee. I'm the CEO of Homer Trust and emceeing for you today on behalf of the committee that has been organizing the Push for Change events in our community. As we do when we get started, I really want to recognize and honor that we are in Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit footsteps which have marked these lands for centuries. We are, as an organization, again, very grateful to have an opportunity here to hear from Joe Roberts and his amazing journey. First, as a youth moving out of homelessness, now in his journey of pushing a shopping cart across Canada to raise awareness and funds to end youth homelessness in our country and here at home. In Edmonton, we are responsible at Homer Trust for the homeless count, and we know that while it's not an absolute number, it does indicate that about 17% of those that experience homelessness in our community are youth under the age of 24. Quite a dramatic number by any measure. And part of our efforts are to actually get better information about that, because we also know that homeless youth are amongst the hidden homeless, the couch surfing, and often in very vulnerable circumstances and would not be reflected necessarily in those numbers. We are working with our partners in the community to end youth homelessness. We have a strategy to end youth homelessness and have launched a Housing First program in the last year, which has been really effective with our partners E4C and the John Howard Society, operating those two teams, having housed 100 youth in the last year, and these are our most vulnerable youth. And my hat's off to those teams, because launching that program has been innovative, the first we know of its kind in Canada, and incredibly effective in a very short period of time. So my hat's off to you guys. Quick note that 50% of the proceeds raised from today's event in Edmonton go to Push for Change and their campaign, as well as 50% staying in our community. And it will be split equally amongst 4 partner agencies that are helping us end youth homelessness. I've mentioned too the Edmonton John Howard Society and E4C, as well as Youth Empowerment and iHuman Youth Society. So it really is benefiting youth very directly that you're here supporting this effort, and I want to really thank you for doing that. Before I go any further into the program, I would like to introduce Community Elder Gary Moostus. He's going to have an opening prayer for us, and before we do that, I will offer protocol. Thank you, Gary. Thank you for all of your work in the community. We know that this work today is a small part of a very big effort in our community. I appreciate you starting it with good intentions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Red Rock, and I'm also known as Four-Legged Human, and my given name is Gary Moostus. I welcome you all here on Treaty 6 territory, and as we go into this into hearing Joe speak about his experiences and that. Myself, I've worked with homelessness for the last 8 years, well, actually most of my life. Homelessness is kind of like a silent killer. We don't know by viewing a person if they're homeless or not. It takes all 4 realms to be able to tell the condition of a human being. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically is the last piece. I'm going to give you an example, and I asked Craig O'Neill if I could use his example, because about a month ago I sat with him, and he came up to me here this afternoon and introduced himself, and I would never ever have recognized that he was a police officer until I seen him in full regalia of a police officer. So that's how homelessness is. We don't know who is homeless. Some of those people are still functioning people who go to work every day but have no home to go to. And my grandmother always used to say, Gary, be careful and mindful how you treat other people, because we don't know what kind of battles that person is fighting. Every morning we wake up and each individual has their own battle that they're going to battle with for that day. And the people that are on the streets, the homeless people, they too have battles that they have to fight. Fighting where they're going to get their next meal, where they're going to sleep that next day. It's survival mode constantly. And with that also, I commend all caregivers, all helpers to help end homelessness, because no matter how you look at it, you are all doing creator's work. You are all put in your places to be able to do what you do on a daily basis, whether it be an RCMP officer, a counselor, a clergyman, a priest, an elder, whoever. You are put there for a reason. It's not by coincidence. So you yourselves as well have to look after yourselves. Be mindful of your physical, mental, emotional, and physical being. Because like I said, it's invisible. It's a silent killer. And within the 8 years that I've worked in the homeless community organization, over 700 people died due to homelessness. And I probably know maybe over 600 of those people. I could probably name them all, not by their original name, but by their street name. But that's a lot of people, and none of these people make the news. None of these deaths. They die in back alleys. They die alone, most of them. And like I said, it's a silent killer. We don't see it. We don't see it in the forefront, and it should be in the forefront. We should be able to see and be able to be mindful and be careful of how we approach people on a daily basis. Riding a bus, for instance, the transit, it's the person sitting next to you or across from you. We don't know if that person is battling homelessness, cancer, or physical or mental or emotional. So we have to treat each other with respect. And now I would like to also share my energies with Joe and also his companion that is walking with him on this journey. And I want to share my energies and also the energies from Treaty 6, Treaty 8, Treaty 7, to be able to accompany him as he journeys across the country. And I also want you as well to be able to share your energies. We all have different faith practices. We all have different spiritual needs, different places that we come from. But I'm going to ask you all to stand and face the east. And I'm going to ask you to, because homelessness also doesn't play favorites. It engulfs all races. It doesn't have any favorites. It will affect anyone and anywhere. So with that, I'm going to ask you all to face the east, which is that way. And I'm going to sing this song, and as I sing this song, I'm going to ask you also to pray in the way that you know how to pray, or to be able to have Joe on his journey, to be able to help him and to be able to create awareness about homelessness. Iksumaga. Apiwitsi hen no tawenan, apiwitsi hen no tawenan, apiwitsi hen no tawenan, hey ha, yo. So from the Treaty 6 territory and from the city of Edmonton, Joe, our energies go with you as you journey to create awareness. Hi, hi.
I would now like to invite Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor, to bring greetings.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. To you, Elder Gary, thank you so much. That was beautiful. I will tell you that many years ago, I met an amazing man called Tom Jackson. Tom Jackson was 36 when he was still on the street. And all he asked of me, if you can imagine, was when I walked down the street and saw somebody that perhaps might be homeless, that I would simply look them in the eye and smile. And I've tried to do that ever since. It's been a great, great lesson for me. And so it reminded me of your elder, Gary, about your remarks. Thank you. And I, too, acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory. So, as you all know, we celebrate Canada's 150th birthday. And this very milestone occasion has been an opportunity to look back at everything that Canadians have accomplished together over the years. It's a long and it's an impressive list, and we have a great, great deal to be proud of. And there is still some things that we know that we're working on. And one of them is this issue of homelessness in our communities. What I love about Homeward Trust, I have to say, is the specific goal that you've set for Edmonton in that regard. You're not going to stop until the homeless rate is 0%. That is wonderful. And I can tell you that, yep, yes. I can tell you one thing, that Doug and I have been getting to know our capital region really well since we've moved here, and since I started as Lieutenant Governor, which was 2 years ago. And I want you to know I have every confidence that you're going to reach that goal. I love the people of Edmonton. The way you support each other in this community is amazing. I just absolutely love that support. And I have met so many incredible people. We know that no one in need should be going without or forced to live on the street. We all know that. And it's particularly hard for me to accept that there are homeless children and youth living here, or anywhere in Alberta, and even in Canada. So I certainly appreciate the dedication that so many of you are bringing to that piece of the puzzle. Now, this includes the amazing heart and commitment that you, Joe Roberts, you are amazing, that you've been sharing with all Canadians through his cross-country push for change. Joe's work reminds us that youth living on the streets have the same potential as any other Canadian. They have so much to share, and the issue is simply too important for any of us to be looking away. That's why I look at that person and smile. I started my career as a teacher, and I continue to learn and draw inspiration from youth. Let me tell you, they are amazing. If there's one thing I know, it's that every single young person in this community has the capacity to astonish us with what they can do. All they need is the right support, the right encouragement, and the right opportunity. So, as Her Majesty, the Queen's representative, I'd like to thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. And everyone else here for reaching out to help homeless Edmontonians. I'd also like to recognize the leaders in Homeward Trust and each of the partner organizations involved to this essential work. I know that you're making great progress, and I wish you continued success, and I am there for you. I want you to know that. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you so much. I'm really moved by that, Your Honor. Your passion and frankly, expression of confidence in the community is huge. And you know, sometimes it starts with believing we can, and then knowing we can, and that's so encouraging. Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce the RCMP, and actually, to be honest, I guess if I was walking across Canada, that would be a really important partnership because the RCMP have been ensuring Joe and his team are safe on our highways. And to deliver a message, we have Inspector Chris Culhane, the officer in charge of K Division Community Policing Services, to bring greetings on behalf of the RCMP.
Couple things. First, I'd like to recognize we're on traditional Treaty 6 territory. Appreciative they extended the invitation for us to be here today. Your honors, Elder Mustus, MLA David Shepard. Hello, bonjour, Tansei. My name is Christopher Culhane. I'm the officer in charge of community policing. And I'm very honored to bring greetings on behalf of K Division, that's Alberta, RCMP. I hope over the course of this afternoon and luncheon you have an opportunity to have some fun, learn and laugh. Her Honor's speech always makes people laugh, so we can tick that off. She's always sprinkles excellent humor in there, and it's always a privilege to listen to her. And network, most importantly. And I think you know, the RCMP aren't allowed to fundraise or encourage people to. However, there's a silent auction in the back, and I give you strong consideration to consider making that one of your donations of choice today, in addition to the tables that everyone's purchased. So thank you for that. For me personally, it's been very inspiring to see the efforts of Mr. Roberts galvanize numerous agencies, both government and non-government, to address youth homelessness and poverty. It's a very unfortunate reality that many youth do not have access to the basic comforts and necessities of life. Events like this are a huge mechanism of positive change. Mr. Roberts' message of profit from adversity really resonated with me. Adversity comes in many forms and can be a barrier to achievement. However, placing the proper lens on adversity, much like Mr. Roberts did, can be the catalyst of attainment. I applaud this positive message and the change that Mr. Roberts made, not only for himself, but countless others across Canada, and I think that's just phenomenal. I'm very humbled by what you've done. You can clap too. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and I wish you safe travels on your journey home, wherever that may be. I can assure you that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police will remain strong in our support of Mr. Roberts and any of the youth initiatives that are nationally across Canada. It's been a strategic priority of the RCMP since time and will continue to be, because youth are not only the leaders of today, but the future leaders of tomorrow, and events like this equip them with skill set that they need to reach their full potential. So on behalf of the RCMP, thank you. Merci. Aye.
Thank you very much, and the support of the entire RCMP that's been supporting us. Thank you so much. For those that don't know, Joe Roberts has taken a bit of a detour to be with us here today, and we are so grateful that he was able to. And Team Push for Change joined him. He has been along the Trans-Canada Highway, and he's and in terms of coming to Edmonton, he's really connected to, and he shared with me earlier, the rich involvement that some of the agencies in this community have had with this effort to end homelessness, and his personal awareness of that and connection to those organizations. So it wasn't a destination he was going to miss. So thank you very much for doing that, and his team. Joe is pushing his shopping cart 24 kilometers a day and inspiring Canadians with his personal story of transformation. Joe is the winner of the Ontario Premier's Award, the Courage to Come Back Award, and recently received an honorary doctorate from the Laurentian University. 25 years ago, he was a homeless youth, pushing a shopping cart around Vancouver's downtown east side. Today is day 425 of a 517-day trek. Joe... That is really impressive. That's 7,805 kilometers of 9,100 kilometers. And I want to thank you again for joining us. And if everybody can join me in welcoming Joe and the Team Push for Change.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief. They only gave me 2 hours. That never gets old. I remember I had to speak in Alberta about 5 years ago, and I had to speak to the Alberta Engineering Association in Red Deer. And this is a group of men and women throughout the province who build infrastructure. They build bridges and tunnels and highways. And I lived in Vancouver at the time, so I flew to Calgary, and I was driving to Red Deer, and I was scratching my head thinking, what does a guy who was homeless for several years of his life, living under bridges and tunnels, say to people who build bridges and tunnels for a living? And the best thing I could come up with was, thanks. Keep up the good work. I really wasn't sure of that joke. I'm really excited to be here. I'm very humbled to be here today. To see a community come together, to see the stakeholders, frontline service providers, our friends from the fire department, our partners with the Mounties, to see Homeward Trust, the Lieutenant Governor, MLA, and everyone. I'm humbled by this experience because when we started 6 years ago planning a national engagement to talk about what we can do to prevent, reduce, and end youth homelessness, we asked the question, would anybody care? Would anybody really come together and care? Because let's face it, crossing the country for a cause has been done. But we took action in the face of that uncertainty, and we began to move forward. And here we are on day 425, and I've walked 7,805 kilometers across what I believe to be the greatest country in the world. In 1989, I was homeless, living on the streets. I pushed a shopping cart around East Vancouver. My life was lost. I'd made every conceivable mistake that a young person could make in their life. I was born and raised in a little town, but by the time I was 15, I left home, and I wore my welcome out in this tiny little town, and I jumped on a bus, and I headed to Vancouver. And I thought, if I just get to the big city, more opportunities will be available to me. I had no idea what was waiting for me when I got to Vancouver. I stand here today, ladies and gentlemen and friends, as a community investment gone correct. I'm here today because of over 10,000 people who have invested in me. You listen to the bios and you listen to the news articles, and they talk about how great Joe is. I'm here because of my team. I'm here today because of Marie and because of Bobby. I'm here today because of our community champions like Lori DeGrace and Homeward Trust. I'm here today because of the Mounties. I'm here today because of access to treatment, because I had educators and I had sponsors, I had people from the recovery community all pour their life and time into me. My possibility, which was hard to see when I looked like that. But they saw it, and they invested. And that's why I'm here today. Not because of anything I did well, but because I had community wrapped around me. As we were preparing for this event, that's what I'm humbled by here in Edmonton today, is how you have come together. The push for change's execution in this city is because you showed up. And we just want to say thanks for that. Yeah. I grew up in Midland, Ontario. This was a picture of me in grade 2. And I remember I had a report card from my grade 2 teacher. I think her name was Mrs. Finnegan. And I had a report card that was like many report cards I would get growing up. She said, Joe has so much potential, but he has a hard time sitting still and listening. And I was always, I was always full of energy. It was difficult for me to pay attention. I think maybe today I might have been diagnosed with mild ADD. I was kind of all over the map. But I grew up in a relatively safe and happy environment. I grew up in Midland, Ontario, a town of 5,000 people. And I remember I used to sit in that classroom, and I would look at the clock. And when the clock, the bell would ring at 3:30, I couldn't wait to go home. I had this dad who was larger than life and a mom who was incredibly supportive. I had a brother, older brother, and a younger sister, and a little dog named Angus. We lived at 759 Dominion Avenue in Midland. And everything for the first 8 years of my life was perfect. My father was this kind of man who was just like me. He couldn't wait to get home after work. He was there for us. He was a hockey coach. We went on family vacations. But more importantly, I remember my father speaking to my possibility as a child. He would say things to me like, "I love you, son. You can do and be anything." For the first 8 years of my life, I had people around me, supporting me, loving me, giving me those messages of resiliency that I would later need in my life. But in 1975, life lifed our family. We got a knock on the door, and just like that, Dad was gone. Maybe life has lifed you. Wandering down the road of life, and all of a sudden, tragedy strikes. Adversity we have to face. We face it in our families. We face it in our workplaces. We face it with our government. We face it with trips to the doctor's offices. So we got a knock on the door, and just like that, our family dynamic changed forever. Dad was the only one in the family that made a living. It wasn't that my mom couldn't have had a career. She just chose to be a single mom, to be there for us children. And just like that, the dynamic changed. Marker number 1, early childhood trauma. Mom did what she could only do, and within a year, she remarried. She was faced with not being able to pay a mortgage, and there was a lot of insecurity and fear and anxiety. And the next man that came into the family, he wasn't like my dad. In fact, he couldn't have been more opposite to my father. He was a violent, abusive alcoholic. And so I went from a dad who would say things like, "I love you, you can be and do anything," to a man who'd say things like, "You're stupid, you're dumb, you'll never amount to anything." And I was 8. And the thing that I understand today about being a youth advocate is that if you can get a child to believe a lie about who they are, you can control some of their life choices. By the time I was 9, I had this fractured sense of self-worth. I was trying to figure out how I fit into the world. An opportunity presented itself. My brother and his older friends were experimenting with drugs, and I joined them. And I joined them not because I was curious about drug use. I joined them because I wanted to connect. I wanted to belong. There's some great research out there right now that says the opposite of addiction isn't recovery. The opposite of addiction is connectedness. It's community. I was willing to sell myself short to be connected, to go against the values and the things that I was raised to believe so that I could have friends. What happened for me is under the influence, I went home, and the chaos that was my day-to-day life no longer had that impact on me. I could finally deal with the stuff that was going on in my home. And in 1975, 76, 77, 78, we didn't talk about family violence. I remember 2 years had passed after my father had died, and I was sitting in that same classroom, and I looked up at the clock. It said 3:20, and I just didn't want to go home. You know, by the time I was 15 years old, I was angry. I was rebellious. I started to push and fight back. My drug use began to escalate. And I was angry at everything. And I didn't really understand why I was angry. I was mad. I've learned since then that I had a lot of this pent-up anger and frustration because the people that had been entrusted with the responsibility to take care of me had failed me. And so I began to rebel and push back. And by the time I was 15, I had one of those screaming matches with my mom and my stepfather, and the door slammed, and out of the house I went. At 15 years old, I left home. At 15 years old, I didn't have the skills to deal with life on its own. I had marker number 2, which was substance abuse and addiction, and marker number 3, which was family conflict. We know in this country that one of the leading causes that creates this phenomenon of youth homelessness is family conflict. And I've asked young people, hundreds of thousands of them across this great nation of ours, have you ever had a fight with your mom and dad? Have you ever been around anyone who's ever used drugs? Have you ever struggled with depression and anxiety? You see, in order to create systemic change, we need to understand what these root causes really are, collapse them, and be able to provide the services necessary so that kids don't cycle out. Instead of just looking at someone and saying, well, you're there because you deserve to be there. 15, I was on my own. At 15 years old, I didn't know how to cook a box of Kraft dinner, let alone fend for myself in a big world. And like many small-town kids, I lived and tried to stay in that small community, but I began to cycle out until one day I jumped on a Greyhound bus, and I left Ontario and I headed to Vancouver. I got off the bus, and I remember I was sitting in a little park, and the sun was coming up over the east side, and I was so excited. Vancouver was where I was going to make my fresh start. Little did I know that in that park that I was celebrating, within about 3 months, I'd be living under the bridge beside that park. And the next number of years, things spun violently out of control for me as I lived and fell deeper down the hole of addiction, homelessness, struggling with mental health on the streets of East Vancouver. By 1989, I would have been one of those people you see pushing a shopping cart. I had dirty, matted hair, yellow, broken teeth, and yet inside that was a possibility. See, oftentimes when we look at things in the world, we see it through the lens of what's likely to happen next. That's a probability mindset. What's the likelihood of that individual finding success? The likelihood is low, but the possibility is 100%. See, great innovators, great business leaders, great thought leaders, great world leaders see something that isn't and then draw people towards it. That is what the heart of innovation is to have a belief in something that isn't but could be. My story ended well because I had a community, I had access to a mom who wouldn't quit on me. And when things got really, really bad, I finally reached out and I called my mom. My mom and I had a very strained relationship at that time because I called my mom all the time to help bail me out. And so she just thought it was another rescue call. And so she asked me one question. She said, are you really sincere? And I said, yeah, I am. And she said, okay, son, hold tight. And she got on a plane in Toronto and she flew out to Vancouver. And she scooped me up and she brought me back to the Barrie area where I began to live in her basement. Things didn't get well right away. I had a major incident in my life, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But why this part of the story is so important is that I had a house to move into first. You see, you can't just get a haircut and pull up your socks and deal with all of the issues. You need to have housing. You need to be safe. And then you can implement the services that are necessary for vocation, education, job training, counseling, mental health. But until you have that address, it's kind of difficult. My mom was a saint and continues to be that person in my life who loves me no matter what. But my mom is an addictions counselor, and she's not a mental health worker, and so I continued to struggle. Until one night, I had a very dark night. And she walked into my room, and what she saw disturbed her a great deal. I was sitting on the edge of my bed with a handgun, trying to find the courage to end my life. I couldn't find the doorway out on my own. And my life got so dark that I considered that permanent solution to a temporary set of problems. Mom did the only thing she could think of, and she ran out of the room and she called 911. At which time, I would come face to face with someone who would end up becoming one of my heroes. That night, through 911, the Ontario Provincial Police were called, and dispatched to my house was a gentleman named Constable Scott McLeod. Scott had to enter a very dangerous situation, not knowing what the potential outcomes could be. Too often we turn on the news or the Twitter feed and we hear these examples of what happens when those exchanges go horribly wrong. That night, Scotty got it right. And he diffused a very dangerous situation. And in so doing, created an opportunity for me to explore that possibility that was my life. Another night, another place, and it could have gone horribly wrong and ended right there. When I had a year sober, I wrote Scott a letter and let him know the impact he had on my life. When I graduated college, I wrote Scott a letter and let him know the impact he had on my life. When my daughter was born, I wrote Scott a letter and let him know the impact he had on my life. Scott retired last year from the Ontario Provincial Police with 35 years in the force, and he'll tell you that that night defined his career. Scotty's one of my closest friends in the whole world today, and when we had Christmas dinner last year, Scott was there with my family. Each one of us in our own way can play a role in supporting and loving someone where they're at. You don't have to be a police officer. You just have to see someone's possibility. As a result of Scott, I ended up going back to into a drug and alcohol rehabilitation program. They worked with me, and after 6 months, my drug counselor tricked me into going back to college. He did. He completely lied to me because I wouldn't have taken those risks on my own. And I remember he said to me, he says, I'll tell you what. He says, I'll get you 6 months of free housing if you apply for college. And I said, okay. What I didn't know is I had the housing locked in anyway, but I've been telling that story for about 25 years, and last year I was in Belleville, Ontario, and Brian was actually in the room. He says, I'm right here, and I said, you lied to me. He says, I know, I lie to everybody. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor. How am I going to get you to do anything if I tell you the truth, right? So I had a second lease on life, and I went to Loyalist College, and I remember when I walked onto the campus at Loyalist, I had two thoughts. First thought I had was, 6 months ago, they wouldn't let me use the bathroom here. And then the next thought I had was, man, is there ever a lot of cans around here? Because I used to collect the cans. You'll get it on the way home. Anyway, at Loyalist, I had these great teachers, and they began working with my possibility. And I let them know where I come from, and I was scared to do that. But they started to work with me. And I started to do well. I started to get A's, I started to get B's. And after 3.5 years, I walked across the stage just like this on a bright sunny day like today. And they called out my name. They said, Joe Roberts, Dean's List. I graduated with a 3.94 GPA. I still didn't get a haircut. I remember walking across the stage and going down to where my mom was sitting, right at that table. She had this look of peace and pride, and she kissed me on the cheek. She said, I'm so proud of you, son. And instead of being happy, all I could think about was how many of my friends didn't make it that far, had the same possibility that I have. But they just needed one champion to say, I believe in you, kid. And that's what drives my footsteps when it's raining and it's snowing. And I don't feel like getting out of bed at 5 in the morning to walk another 24 kilometers. It's for that underdog. It's for that person who doesn't believe in themselves. But inside them is that possibility. That's why I push for change. After graduating college, I went out into the business world. I took the transferable skills, and I started to excel. I did very well in sales. I remember my first sales manager says, how come you're so successful at selling? He says, don't you hate all the rejection? Rejection? You want rejection? Go try panhandling in front of 7-Eleven. Anyways, I got my first job in sales, selling photocopiers, my second job as a manager in an audiovisual company, and my third opportunity was in a .com. And the tech sector was exploding. At this time, I had moved back to Vancouver, and in less than 4 years, we took a small startup technology company and we built it into a very, very successful company. In less than 4 years, I found more success than I could have ever imagined in my life. And I remember the day that defined that. I was driving my big fancy car into downtown Vancouver, and I passed by Hastings in Maine, and there was a kid with a shopping cart. And I looked out my window, my big fancy car, and I saw this 19 or 20-year-old with a shopping cart. And when I got to the office that day, sitting on my desk was a copy of Canadian Business in Maclean's magazine. And I was on the cover of Canadian Business and acknowledged in Maclean's magazine. In less than 12 years, I went from a young man who struggled with addiction and homelessness, mental health, to being a successful entrepreneur. I got to a place in my life where I was the Canadian version of the American dream, but I wasn't any more fulfilled. Because what I understand about life is that life is about service. It's about what you contribute. Giving is living. And I wanted to do something with my lived experience, my passion, and my story to pay it forward. I attribute much of my success to a number of things that have nothing to do with me. One of them is this great nation of ours. As Canada celebrates its 150th anniversary as a nation, there are so many great things to celebrate. We are a country rich in natural resources, a country that supports one another here and on other shores. We are a country that's inclusive. We're a country that thinks forward. We're a country that exports its engineering and thought leadership. I live in a country that paid for my detox, that paid for my college education, continues to subsidize my health care. We have a country today that's having an active dialogue on what we need to do to implement innovative long-term solutions to prevent, reduce, and end youth homelessness. The dialogue continues. We are a country that can get there. I love my daughter, I love my wife, and I love this nation. And if I could take my story and pay it forward and fulfill on that promise I made on a street corner that if I ever got off the streets, I would do something to help somebody else. In that context, I was on an airplane ride with my friend Sean going into Calgary, and I said, Sean, I want to do something with my lived experience, and I want to share my story passionately and really draw attention to what we can do to prevent, reduce, and end youth homelessness. And when I say that, I don't mean it in a trite way. I say it in a context of possibility. You see, it's not until we speak something out into the ether that we can begin to wrap our heads around it. Somebody once said that man could fly while everyone else laughed. Somebody said we could put a man on the moon while everybody else laughed. But a conversation began to happen in this country several years ago about ending youth homelessness. And while some snickered, other people got to work actually applying what those plans and the application of those strategies look like. And I'm proud to be in Alberta today, a province that has an active plan, that is looking forward, leaning forward, and I'm just excited about that. And so in this context of what could I do, what could Joe Roberts do with a story of lived experience? And Sean said to me on the airplane, he says, when Canadians want to raise money for things, they run across the country. Why don't you run across Canada, Joe? He said, it's kind of our thing. At the time, I was 45 years old, 280 pounds, and a non-athlete, and I said, why don't you run across Canada? Kind of busy this week. But then he said something clever. He says, why don't you push a shopping cart? He says, you can visit communities along the way, you can have a conversation, you can bring different partners together. So I began to understand what this issue of homelessness looks like. And before I actually began to study it, all I knew about what this issue looks like is from lived experience. So I began to study the data. We knew that we needed to create some partnerships. So we went out and built a relationship with A Way Home, which is the National Coalition to Prevent, Reduce, and End Youth Homelessness. We began talking with Dr. Stephen Gates from the Canadian Observatory, and we built a charitable partnership with Raising the Roof. And by creating those alliances, we were now part of, instead of just one guy in a shopping cart, we were really talking about this national push of the things that we need to do to make the shift to invest in prevention and housing first. So armed with these partnerships and Sean's suggestion of running across the country, we formed the Push for Change. When we look at how we address homelessness in Canada, this is my favorite slide from Dr. Stephen Gates. Traditionally, we've invested a lot in emergency services. But if we're ever going to get to a place where we actually see a sunset on the issue of homelessness, we need to invest on either side of emergency services. By supporting emergency services, we need to stem the flow of individuals coming into homelessness through prevention models, and we need to invest in housing first. If we really want to support frontline service providers, we need to offer an opportunity for people to exit the system and stop people from entering. So based on that context, we started the Push for Change, and I began training. This entire campaign has been built by volunteers and a core group of individuals. And we were completely funded before we left St. John's, Newfoundland by our charitable partner, the United Association of Canada. I know, do I have some UA members from 488? All right, let's give them some love, yeah. When we started the campaign, we knew that it was important to have it fully funded before we took one step off of Newfoundland, out of Cape Spear. And it was the United Association that came forward and gave us the largest chunk of our operating budget. And the reason why that's important, and I share it here today, is that 100% of the money that we raise here today, half of it's going to stay in Edmonton, the other half is going towards a youth homeless prevention model called the Upstream Project through our charitable partner, Raising the Roof. We retain none of that money to operate. We're fully funded. And UA Canada, 488, and the other locals right across this entire nation have not only been there to support us financially, but they've been there to walk with us. The UA is dedicated to connecting young people in this country to a brighter and better future, and we thank you for that. This is our team. We've got, I can call him this. His name's Baba McGee. Baba McGee drives the RV. His name's Robert Cook, and he's our wheelman. Let's give Rob some love. And our campaign director, who wears about 14 different hats, is Marie Marcoux Roberts. And she's sitting down here. Let's give her some love. Marie is also, if you can tell by the last name, the love of my life, the reason I get out of bed every single morning to walk. Not because I'm passionate about walking, but because she hogs the bed, but it's another issue entirely. Marie is my rock. She is the heart behind the cart. She's been putting in 18-hour days for over 4 years. And I can't do it without you. Push for Change also has a love story embedded in it because Marie and I dated in grade 10. And she was my first high school crush and girlfriend. And then we split up and she married the drummer. I know, how can you compete? A drummer with a Trans Am. Anyways, she gets mad when I do that. I really hope you like that because I will be paying for that later. We got married just before the trek started about 16 months ago. And so we just celebrated our very first wedding anniversary. So in many ways, the Push for Change has our honeymoon. Yeah. I'm glad you find that amusing because she doesn't. Yeah. Since we left St. John's, Newfoundland, I've been on the road for 14 months. I've seen every season. People ask me where was I in the wintertime. I was walking over Lake Superior in between Sault Ste. Marie and Thunder Bay. Every day has been a challenge. And people say to me, isn't it extraordinary to visit the landscape of all 10 provinces and get to visit the 3 Northern Territories? I say, yes, the landscape is absolutely stunning. But it's the people that are beautiful, who continue to inspire me and keep my feet moving. We have another 3 months to go before we arrive in Vancouver. And you're all invited on September 29th to come and walk with us those last few kilometers as we end in downtown Vancouver. The walk, but not the work. The work of the Push for Change continues. Changing things systematically is not an event, it's a process, and one that will require our work to continue. This short video captures what we've done over the last 14 months. It'll inspire you and give you a bit of a peek into what's happened over the last year and 2 months. Enjoy.
Coming over the bridge, here we are, and there's Joe. Push for Change. you're a great guy, and you're a great Canadian, and I know you're helping all the kids, and God love you.
That's my favorite part. Can we go back to the slide deck? Along the way, we've had some extraordinary things happen. And when I was in Newfoundland, I picked up a penny in a place where a penny had no place to belonging. I was 100 kilometers from any community. And being that pennies are scarce, I thought it was odd. And I picked it up and I banged the dirt off of it. And I looked at that penny. And I realized as I held it in my hand that a metaphor came searing home to me, that this penny I found on the street didn't look like the day it was minted, that it had a rougher road, and had spent a couple of nights outside. But there was no doubt in my mind that that penny, by the very nature and virtue of what it is, cannot and will not ever lose its value. That's the change that we pushed for. And when we got an opportunity to go to Ottawa and meet with our Prime Minister, I gave him that penny. And I told him how important it was that we continue to invest in the young people of this great nation to provide better opportunities to exit homelessness and to prevent it from happening. The following day, we saw an investment from the federal government, the likes of which hasn't been seen for the past 30 years. And a month after that, we flew back to Toronto to be present with our partners as the very first investment in youth homeless prevention was announced. When I began this journey, it was to bring together a voice for change. They told me that I was too old to walk across Canada. They told me, you'll never get that funded. They told me, they'll never let you walk across Lake Superior in the wintertime with a shopping cart. And they told me that you can't end youth homelessness. I think my grade 2 teacher was right. I never really have been a good listener. I want to thank Shaw. They just recently gave me a beautiful award honoring recipient of Shaw's Outstanding Canadians. They're acknowledging 150 different Canadians, and they made a $1,500 donation to the Push for Change, and we want to thank and acknowledge Shaw for that. We also had struck something called a challenge coin, and if you've ever been around paramilitary culture, you understand that a challenge coin represents loyalty. They're traded amongst different groups, and they mean that you're part of the team. And they're given out of loyalty and unity. And on behalf of the Push for Change, Lori, we couldn't have done this without you. This is you and the strength of this community. And on behalf of Marie, Bobby, myself, and our entire board of directors, thank you for being a part of our team.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, but don't go away. It's like Christmas, we're exchanging gifts. We were so honored when Joe chose Edmonton to come to speak, particularly when we're not on his direct route. And the committee from Edmonton would like to thank you and your team
very cool.
with this sculpture that was made as a memento for you, just in case you happen to forget what you've done this last year and a half. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
What can I say after that? Joe is certainly inspirational, and what a story to tell. And thank you so much for taking on this initiative. I know you're making a difference, and the difference that Scott made in your life, I can't imagine the number of lives that you'll be changing. So thank you so much. I'd also like to thank you for the efforts that you're doing for the 4 agencies that we're supporting, E4C, YES, the John Howard Society, and iHuman. I know that they'll be very appreciative, in addition to the Push for Change. Thank you so much for what you've done. And all of you,